Hello and welcome to the wrap up, the Raptors Republic post game show, where we are in the final episode of the season, the final game of the season. The Raptors lost 125-113 to the Indiana Pacers, bringing their record to 27-45 and bringing a close to what has been a very terrible, awful, weird season. I'm your host, Oren Weisfeld, and with me today is Brandon. I already forgot your last name, to be completely honest. It was
Stewart.
Brandon Stewart. Brandon writes for us on Raptors Republic. He is currently in in beautiful British Columbia, but he has been nice enough to join us today. So, Brandon, how you doing, man?
Doing better now that this season's over.
Yeah, like how much did you just not want to watch this Raptors game tonight? Did you have your eyes on the other games at all?
Ever since, I honestly have been kind of keeping an eye on the Hornets-Wizards game because that's deciding the 8th seed, and that's pretty close.
Oh, it's close now.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it's a 1-point game, and they got 3 minutes to go. So I was kind of switching around between those ones. But yeah, ever since we got eliminated and then locked into the 7th best pick odds, I've just been like, I would be watching the game, but it would feel like my mind is just static.
Yeah.
Like it would be a lot of we don't need to be doing this. We know where we are.
Yeah. The Hornets were up like 15 5 minutes ago, so I'm surprised that it's such a close game. But we'll keep the audience updated with that one because it is a big one. And I think, do you know who has the tiebreaker between Indiana and Washington if Washington won?
Believe Washington.
Okay, so I mean that has big implications, but yeah, we're here to talk about the Raptors for one last time, for the last game of the season, and we will have more shows, just so everyone knows coming up. You know, we're gonna do some draft lottery, draft show. We're gonna do some Canada basketball potentially, and maybe bring some more draft people on in anticipation of the draft, but for now, let's just talk about the game we just saw. Obviously, the Raptors were down to 6 players, and 3 of them were centers. So it's not like you can draw a ton of conclusions from that game. But just like in general, over the past few games when the Raptors have really shortened their bench and gone to these young players and really seen what they had in them, who has, I guess, stuck out to you, good or bad, on the Raptors side of things?
He didn't play today, but I mean, Jalen Harris has already done more than I thought he would in his rookie season. You know, I was expecting him to kind of be like what we had with Paul Watson last year, where he'd play a couple games, he'd look okay, and then we just bring him back next year. But he dropped 30 plus the other night. Today, you know, Malachi Flynn had a disappointing first half, but he, like he always does, came alive in the second half, and I looked stupid for criticizing him in the first half.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's kind of hard, like you said, it's kind of hard to draw anything from this because, you know, these guys aren't going to be playing 40 minutes a night every game. So it's difficult to say how this is going to work for them development-wise. You know, obviously it's great that they're getting so much run, but it's just so hard to see how this is going to go on into next season.
Yeah, I mean, and plus the spacing too. It's really hard for Malachi to initiate good offense when he's playing with 3 centers. But in terms of Flynn and Harris, did you watch them coming out of the draft at Nevada and Flynn was at San Diego State? Like, did you like the picks for the Raptors? And since they picked them to now, has your opinion changed at all?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I didn't like the Flynn pick. I thought, you know, if we were picking a point guard, I would have preferred Theo Maledon, who's in OKC now.
Yeah,
because he's almost 4 years younger. He's 6'5", and in my opinion, he had about equal pick and roll ability. That's not to say Flynn hasn't gone above what I thought he would do this year. I think he was still pretty underwhelming up until about late March, early April, when he really started getting those starts and he started fitting into his role better. So Yeah, that was. I didn't really care for the pick just because I felt there were better players on the board. Desmond Bain was another guy I was looking at, and he's just killing it down in Memphis. I think he still leads the rookies in 3-point percentage. He's just an absolute sniper,
Yeah.
and I think he's going to be good for a long time. Those were the two guys that I was really looking at. But yeah, Flynn has kind of proven me wrong a bit. I think he has the potential to be like a really good bench guard. I don't know if I'd put the expectations on him that he'll be a starter yet. I think I need to see more from him, and I think I need to see more consistency across next season for sure before I'm ready to say that yeah, we got a starter in him. But it's certainly good to see him coming along in a way that a lot of NBA scouts were calling him NBA ready, and he didn't really look the part in the first couple months, but now he's kind of showing what we were told about him and what we saw at San Diego State.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jalen Harris, though, I didn't watch a lot of him at Nevada, but I was familiar with him. He had a reputation of being a crafty scorer, and I think that's carried over pretty well. And so I'll definitely be interested in seeing how he grows. He was more of a really questionable, like I didn't really know much about him other than the fact that he had a scoring reputation. But I'm really curious to see how he develops next year. If he's like the first two guard off the bench, then that'll be great for his development.
For sure. I mean, with Jalen Harris, you're playing with house money because it's the 59th pick and you don't really have any expectations. But let's go back to Malachi real quick. Because, I mean, the two guys you mentioned, Bain and Maladon, are having really good seasons. But, like, with Flynn, I think the question I come back to is, like, what is his ideal use in the, like, short-term future? Like, is he a scoring? Do you see him more of, like, a scoring plug off the bench, or do you see him more as like a pure point guard? Obviously, like maybe the answer is just a balance of the two, but like if you had to pick one, because I really like when I watch him, I just think like he can get buckets, and I feel like his like playmaking in the pick and roll is good. He makes reads well, but he's not like an elite playmaker. He can't see over a defense. He struggles to make like really elite reads. So I do see him as more of like a scorer in the short-term future. I'm wondering if you agree with that.
I think it's kind of a mix of both. You're on the right track. I wouldn't depend on him to be a scorer by any means. I don't think he's going to be a very efficient scorer, just due to his he doesn't really get into the paint very often, and when he does, he's usually looking to kick out. And his shooting hasn't really come along as well as we thought it would. So that's kind of remains to be seen as to how well of a scorer he's going to be. So I think I would trust him a bit more if he focused more on running plays, especially for the bench. And that's where I would look to kind of get him comfortable over the next couple of years for sure. While it looks like he's being groomed for that bench point guard role for next year for sure. So getting him comfortable, just, setting the offense for the bench and getting us into making sure we don't lose leads. And that'll be what I expect of him and what I think he'll excel at.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think he will be the point guard off the bench next year. But I believe in that 3-point shot. Like I really think it's going to start to fall more often than it has this season. And like he has a little mid-range game. He can get to the rim, especially when because he's a good passer. People will play the pass, and he gets to the rim, I think, like a surprising amount for someone as skinny and small as he is. So yeah, I mean, we'll see, but he's an interesting guy. Any other Raptors you want to touch on before we get to the draft? Like especially the young players, whether it's Freddie Gillespie or a DeAndre Bembry or Kem Birch. Anyone stood out?
I love Kem Birch. I've kind of been wanting him for a while. I didn't think he would be this good. I guess Orlando was just misusing him that badly. Because wow, it's like a night and day difference, the player he is here compared to the one he was in Orlando.
Yeah, we were talking about him on the last show. I mean, I feel like he's a really perfect system fit for the Raptors, especially defensively. Like his thing that I think has to work on, the biggest thing is the 3-point shooting, because the Raptors do prefer to play that way if they can play 5 out. But like defensively, he's just so mobile, I think, and so like fairly switchable. But he does exactly what the Raptors ask of their centers. And I think when you watch Baines, you kind of notice he was the opposite of that perfect fit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Baines, we tried to kind of mimic what we had with Gasol a little too much, and that was just a recipe for failure in itself because obviously Baines isn't Gasol. But I mean, getting Birch for sure definitely helps with our defensive switchability in our scheme as a whole, just because of how, like you said, how agile and how switchable he is. And then his blocks too. Like he's been, didn't show anywhere near this kind of. I mean, he's always been a good rim protector, but he has just taken it to another level since he came to Toronto. So that's been a welcome surprise too, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be curious to see what they do with the center position in free agency because, I mean, on one hand, you could start Birch and not pay a whole lot of money at that center spot, and on the other hand, you could go out and get a starting center and bring Birch off the bench and then have like a lot of your cap space in that center spot. Yet you still have OG Anunoby as a backup center. Like, where do you feel like they should go there? Do you think Birch can just start?
I think I think Birch can start. I think they're probably hoping to get somebody, better than Birch. I think ideally Birch is probably the backup or the sixth man. But if they fail to get a big man in free agency, I don't think it's the end of the world to bring Birch as the starter next year. But they may want to address that by the trade deadline.
Right.
I know a lot of Raptors fans are looking at Jared Allen, but Cleveland's gonna match whatever he gets.
Yeah.
Rashawn Holmes is another name I've seen thrown around. I think he's a bit more realistic of a target, so that'll be interesting to see if we go after him and how much we're willing to offer for him because I really like Rashawn Holmes.
Rashawn Holmes is the dream, but it's going to be hard to bring back Kyle Lowry if that's also on the table. If they want to do that and sign Rashawn Holmes, but yeah, that center spot is definitely interesting. So let's get to the draft, because I think that's kind of where you focus. And I mean, before we even get to some of your favorite prospects, let's address like what holes are you looking to fill in the draft? I mean, what's your philosophy? Are you a draft for fit or a draft for like upside type of guy? And like, what are the holes that you think that this Raptors team has that you would like to see maybe filled through the draft?
So I'm definitely a draft for talent over fit because otherwise I think that's how you end up with you end up taking Bagley over Doncic if you're looking to draft for fit.
Yeah.
It gets a little more trickier once you get into the second round because the second round is like such a gray area in terms of talent and fit where you really could argue anybody between 35 and 60 is a similar level talent. So obviously you're just going to take the better fit if you think two players are the same level of talent. As for what the Raptors need to fill in the draft, they obviously need a scorer. I think someone who we can develop into like a first option for sure if we somehow miraculously move up into the top four selections, or if we can get somebody at 7 like a Moses Moody, someone who can become a first option scorer, that would help us amazingly in the long run. I think also we need bench depth in the front court, especially. I don't think Freddie Gillespie's great, but I think he's realistically a third string center. He's definitely going to need a bit more development before he can reliably come off the bench for a winning team. So I think you're going to be looking for like a big man in the second round, someone who you can look to bring off the bench next year, if assuming Kem Birch is starting or what the center rotation looks like. Regardless, we need more bigs. And then, yeah, other forwards as well, like someone to back up Siakam, give reliable minutes there. Paul Watson in Utah, I like a lot. I think they could fill in minutes next year, but we could also look at backup wings as well. Those are the guys we're going to be looking for in the second round. But in the first round for sure, or if we stick around 7, I'm looking for a scorer, someone who we can develop into that first option.
I'm with you there. Like there's always a lot of talk about drafting a center with that pick. And like outside of Evan Mobley, I just don't want the Raptors to go down that James Wiseman route, right? Because like they're too close to contention to now try to develop a 19-year-old center who we know it takes centers a really long time in the NBA to learn the game and learn the speed. So I'm with you there in terms of like going for upside and trying to get a guy who could, I mean, the balance is hard, but you want to balance someone who can help right away, but then also potentially develop into that number one option type of player. So who are your favorite prospects in the draft? And I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley are everyone's top two, and I think they've been talked about ad nauseum. So other than those two, let's assume maybe the Raptors get the third pick here. Who are your favorite prospects for them?
If we stick at the third, I'm looking at Jalen Suggs or Jalen Green.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of fits into what we're looking for going forward. If we're looking for, if we don't think Fred is really the guy to have at point, and if we want someone a bit taller, who's a bit more of a floor general, who can play better on ball, then you're looking at Jalen Suggs. If you're looking for, if you think, you want to go 100% go for talent, you're ignoring the Gary Trent situation, and you think Fred is capable of running the point long term, then you're probably going to look at Jalen Green.
Yeah.
Just because he's an electric scorer. He can jump out of the gym. He can score from all three levels. And I really see, like, I hate player comparisons, but there really is some Zach LaVine, some Bradley Beal to his game. And I think that might be an amazing outcome for him, and certainly something that the Raptors need.
Yeah. So would you lean towards Green if you had to pick between those two?
It's rough because I'm not really a fan of Fred VanVleet at the one. I think he's more of an off-ball player. So for that reason alone, I think I would lean Jalen Suggs.
Mm-hmm.
Just because also Jalen Suggs is a better defender than Green as well. So that's something you don't have to worry about as much. But it's really a coin flip. Like, to me, they're on the same tier of player. Both of them are below Evan Mobley, but they're also a step above Jonathan Kuminga, who's the fifth best player in the draft. So they're in that. Really, that's what I was talking about before. We're two similar talents. You really just kind of have to decide what you want more in the long term. Do you want a two-way point who can become a leader, or do you want a player who can just take over games with his scoring and just, his athleticism?
Yeah, no, that's I've definitely been going back and forth on those two myself. And I'm with you where, I mean, you can never have too much playmaking. So even if Fred does keep developing that playmaking, like having both of them in a front court would definitely a backcourt like Suggs and Fred would work together. And I think Suggs would probably help them more right away, but I think Green has more upside, right? So
yeah.
After those guys, and then like you said, Kuminga's 5, but I don't think Kuminga's a great fit for the Raptors. I don't know if you disagree with that. So after Kuminga, after Kuminga, who do you like in the draft?
Yeah, Kuminga's a bit redundant with OG and Pascal on the roster. So, I mean, I think he's going 5 anyway, so we shouldn't have to worry about him if we land in the top 4, just because Suggs and Green are better. But after that, I'm looking at Moses Moody is probably my 6th.
Okay.
He's and I also really like Jaden Springer.
Yeah, let's go Moody first, if you don't mind. What's the pitch for Moody? Because I know him as like a 3-and-D player, but do you see higher upside than that?
I do, just because he's capable of pulling up off the dribble already. And I think that is something that can be extrapolated pretty well to an NBA skill set, where you can rely on him to be a scorer, especially in tough situations. His field goal is not great coming out of college for a player his size. He's like an athletic 6'6". So you're looking for him to improve his ability to get to the rim for sure. He doesn't really have a floater. And just, improve his contact drawing for sure. But, he can pull up from the mid-range. That was a nice move there. You want to see more of that from him. He can pull up from the mid-range. He's a deadly three-point shooter. That's something he's always been able to do well. Yeah, there's a bit of the mid-range game we were talking about. He's not selfish by any means either. Like, he's not a chucker. He knows when to make that extra pass. Like, he's not a primary playmaker, but you can certainly rely on him to not kill your offense when his shot's not falling.
Sorry, hello. Yeah, I lost you for a second. My Wi-Fi went out real quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, Go ahead, say what you were
I was
saying
just gonna
though.
say, like, yeah, you can't. He's not gonna kill your offense when his shot's not falling, but he can definitely still be someone who you want to put the ball in his hands because he can get the ball in pretty well.
Yeah, like I haven't heard a lot of Moody to Toronto talk, and I think the reason is because people see him as such a 3-and-D guy, and like the Raptors kind of maybe have a few of those, like, coming off the
Yeah,
bench, or obviously OG Anunoby was that, and maybe he'll be more. So, I mean, it's interesting to hear that you think the upside is there, but I guess it's like the jump shooting, right, more than anything. Um, but he doesn't put a ton of pressure on the rim. Is that right?
that's the probably the biggest weakness with his game right now. Just because he's a good defender and he can score from everywhere else, he's just not great at drawing contact, and he can't finish that well all just yet. And I get what you're saying, how it doesn't really make a lot of sense if we're planning on keeping Gary Trent
Mhm.
and probably starting him at the 2 next year if Lowry leaves. But I mean, I would still look at Moody just for talent alone because I really think he can develop into a go-to scorer.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I'm gonna definitely look a little more into him. And then you were saying Jaden Springer, um, someone who I've heard. I mean, I don't know if you listen to this, but Samson Folk at Raptors Republic recently had PD Webb on the podcast, on the Raptors Weekly podcast, and PD Webb was singing Jaden Springer's praises, and saying that he's the guy that he would target if he was the Raptors outside of that top four. So what do you like about Springer yourself?
And I actually kind of agree with that. I've been seeing a lot of people put Jaden Springer in the 20s, which is
Yeah.
frankly ridiculous because he's an 18-year-old 6'4" combo guard. He's ridiculously strong already for an 18-year-old. He just bullies his way into the rim. He hustles his ass off on every possession, and like he's so athletic,
Yeah.
and
So
he's got a crazy bag full of moves, and yeah, there's just a lot to like with Jaden Springer for sure.
Yeah, so I've been messaging you about this a bit. I'll have a piece out on Raptors Republic tomorrow about kind of like how should the Raptors target this draft. And I mean, I think what you land on with a team like the Raptors is that they have a hard pick here because they need a balance, someone who can help right away because they are a competitive team and they're not like a young team that's 5 years away from contention or something like an Orlando or something, but they also want someone with that upside. And I think Jaden Springer, to me, from what I've seen, is outside of the top four, my favorite guy for balancing that. Because, like you said, like he'll come into the league, he'll be a good defensive player, right? He'll put some pressure on the rim. He's strong. And then maybe at 18 years old, right? He's such a young player that maybe he can one day um, develop into that number one guy. Do you think that's accurate, or are there other guys outside of the top four who you think can strike that balance even better?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jaden is definitely someone, despite how young he is, I definitely see him contributing day one in the NBA. And then you have that ceiling to build off of as well. Other than him, um, I could see Jalen Johnson or Scotty Barnes contributing right away.
Yeah.
Their ceilings are also decently high depending on the situations they go to. I mean, Scotty Barnes has the obvious Draymond comparison, and Jalen Johnson is he's like a playmaking uh, forward who, he's kind of needs to work on his offense a bit. He's not very reliable shooter at all, and he's kind of got character concerns. But I wouldn't really dissuade that. I wouldn't really let that dissuade me from taking him at all. Those are the two other guys who I could see maybe making an impact in their first year.
Right.
Franz Wagner as well. I think he'll be a good player in his first year for sure. Just because he's pretty much he's a jack of all trades, master of none. Is Wagner, and I can see him being a good 3-and-D playmaking forward, kind of
Right.
in that. I can't think of a comparison off the top of my head, but
But probably not as much upside as a Springer to you.
he doesn't. He's ceiling's definitely a bit lower for sure.
Right. And then what about guys like Keon Johnson or Josh Giddey? Do you think do you think it's with them that problem is that they're just not ready to help right away?
Yeah, I think they're a bit more on you're willing to take 3 or 4 years to let them fully develop into their roles before you're going to make a push. Um, that could be something the Raptors are looking at, but it wouldn't really make sense with VanVleet and Siakam still on the roster. So yeah, with Giddey especially, I've been growing on him a bit with how much coverage he's been getting lately. I do think the shot is coming along a lot better than people thought it would. I still don't think he'll ever be a good defender at the NBA level just because he's not very quick and he's not very strong. And he doesn't really have that defensive IQ that other not really strong player like Malachi's not very strong either, but he has that defensive IQ where he can pick the lanes, and Giddey doesn't really do that all that well. So, you're drafting Giddey to be a big playmaker who can maybe step out and stretch the floor, but I don't see him really contributing very much, especially for his first year. He might contribute some in his second year, but Keon is a bit of a different story. I don't really know where I'm at with Keon. I think he could either be a complete non-factor in his first year, or he could be for an all-rookie contender. Just it depends on the situation he goes to, how much minutes he gets, how patient the team is with him. He's like Jalen Green and just an electric athlete who can jump out of the gym. He hasn't developed his jump shot really, but he has some dribble moves that he's kind of showcased where you think he can make those off the dribble shots in the half court offense. That could be something that the Raptors need because we don't really have a lot of half court creators. So Keon Johnson down the line could be one of those guys, but yeah, he's just too raw at the moment for me to think that he's going to make a really big impact in his first couple of years. But his ceiling is pretty tantalizing for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. We might take some audience questions in a bit if you guys want to drop some in the YouTube or whatever chat you're on. But first, I'll ask you about some second round guys. The Raptors have 2 second-round picks this year, and for the first time in a long time, they're actually good ones. So I think they'll both probably land, I think, in the late 30s, somewhere around there, if I'm correct. So who do you like in that group of second-round players? You talked a little bit about how there you're kind of drafting a bit more for fit. So basically, you listed everything other than point guards, which we have enough of. So yeah, who do you like in that group?
In the second rounders, I really like, there's a couple guys where I'm seeing them listed in the second round, but I could realistically see them going in the first. So I'll just list off some guys I like that I would love if we got in the second round. And that'll be, my first one will be Kessler Edwards. He's a 6'8", 6'9" forward he's an absolute sniper. He can block shots, play defense, hit steals. I'm really surprised I haven't seen more people talking about him just due to how efficient of a scorer he is and how good of a defender he is as well. He's like an ideal two-way prospect, and it's amazing that I've seen him mocked outside of the first round so much, because I would honestly look at taking him top 20, and a lot of places I see him mocked in the 40s or 50s. But with his length, shooting ability, and ability to finish at the rim, Kessler Edwards is definitely something I would keep an eye on, and someone I encourage Raptors fans to keep an eye on, especially as we approach that second round.
Okay, so is he more of like a 3-and-D type player, or does he put the ball on the floor?
Yeah, he is a 3-and-D type player. He can put the ball on the floor in transition, but I wouldn't expect him to be a half court creator or anything like that.
Right.
But he would definitely be someone I would love coming off the bench next year. Turnaround mid range. He's got an arsenal for sure.
You can never have too much wing depth too. Like we've definitely seen this year with the Raptors and with Desmond Bane, who I'm sure a lot of Raptors fans have had their eye on this season. So I think that's kind of a similar type of player, I guess. So yeah, who other than Edwards?
Another guy I'm looking at is Charles Bassey. He is a 6'10", 6'11" center, shot blocking phenom, rebounder. He has shooting ability. He's not gonna, be like a Porzingis where he's taking multiple threes a game, but he can step back beyond the line. Yeah, amazing shot blocker. He's another guy I personally have in the first round, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's there in the 40s. He's a junior, but he's a young junior. I think he's only 20 or 21 years old. And he's someone I'd look at if we're looking at center depth in the second round. I just love Bassi. He's so fun to watch. He had an injury in his sophomore year, but he's come back from it, I think, a better player. And yeah, just hustles, gets rebounds. He's someone like Raptors fans would love. He's like I don't know. He is really intriguing. He looks like one of those guys who, like a center that does everything. And I wouldn't expect him to be, an all-star or anything like that, but he just does everything you would want, especially as a center, as part of your rotation. That I think is a no-brainer pick in the second round for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting to keep an eye on, because I agree with you with Freddie Gillespie. Like, he is still so raw that even though he's actually like looking pretty not out of place, I would say, over these final few games, he doesn't look out of place. He is still like a raw player who I think is a G League player next season for the most part, before you start to bring him out as like a backup center off your bench. So I have no problem with looking in the second round for a center. Is there like one more guy maybe you want to highlight in the second round?
I'll bring up one more guy. It's Roko Prakasine. I think it's the first option there. His name is, I think it's Prakasine. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but he is really interesting to me. I think he's the youngest international prospect, if not one of the youngest. He's a playmaking, shooting defender. He's one of those raw prospects who you'd like, okay, this kid can do a little bit of everything. And it's because of that where he's so young and he's already looking so polished that I would be thrilled if the Raptors got him in the second round. And I wouldn't even stash him. I would bring him over right away and see what he can do, just because I think he's so polished already at pretty much every facet of the game, despite only being 18 years old. And is someone he's showing a bit of a post up here. I wouldn't think he would be that much of a post player in the league. He's more of a 3-and-D playmaker. It shows a little bit of slashing, but he's definitely someone I would look at.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And like, where are you at with the Raptors drafting two guys in the second round? Because like, we got a lot of young players on this roster. We're about to get a first round pick. Do you think that might just be too many young guys if they do choose to actually draft players with all of those picks rather than trade up or trade them or whatever?
I don't think we can ever have too much young talent. I'm not really sure what the depth is going to look like next year. I think we're going to have a lot of turnover with guys like Bembry, Johnson. I'm not too sure. Paul Watson's probably back next year, but like a bunch of those backup wing forward guys, we're not really sure if they're going to be back next year.
Yeah.
So I think looking at the second round, if we can get a couple pieces who we know can contribute off the bench right away, that would be huge just for our success as a whole. Because when we played our bench this year, our leads just disappeared all the time. So improving our bench, getting some young players who we can also develop would be massive. And I would look at trading into the first round if that's something they want to do. But I think the Raptors have shown that they can. If you're looking at some guys in the early 40s, it's probably not that big of a talent gap between the guys in the late 20s and the late 30s when we're looking at this draft. So I would only trade up into the first round if we're looking at like someone major falling, like if Jaden Springer for some reason falls into the 20s, that's when I'd look at trading up. Or if one of the guys who's mocked to go in the lottery, just if we have a Kevin Porter Jr. situation, then I'd look at trading up. But other than that, I think we're fine staying with the 2 second rounders.
Yeah, Springer it's crazy how different the mocks are. I mean, I've seen him go from 7 to I think I could name 2 drafts where he's at 20. I think the Ringer and the Athletic both have Springer near 20. And yet a lot of draft people that I trust have been saying that Springer is like a top 10 pick for sure. So I mean, do you have any ideas? I'll ask you, like, why you think the people are so different on Springer?
I I genuinely don't know. Like, to me, if we're looking at guys like Davion Mitchell, who I think is a late first round pick, and I see him mocked in the top 10.
Yeah.
Because I think Jaden Springer is younger and has the potential to be much better than Davion Mitchell,
Yeah.
just due to what he's shown already. And whereas Davion Mitchell is, you kind of have players like him in every draft. He's a 6'3", 6'2", 3-and-D guard who we've seen players like that go in the 20s all the time. And his backcourt mate at Baylor, Jared Butler, who I also have probably in the early teens, close to 14, 15 range. I think Jared Butler is a better player than Davion Mitchell as well.
Yeah.
So it's
So
like I'm not really sure why people have Jaden Springer mocked so low, because I think he really shows everything you want out of a young player. I guess maybe because he's kind of raw, but that's not really enough for me. I think he's shown he's pretty capable.
especially because his teammate Keon Johnson is more raw and is higher on most draft boards.
Yeah,
Um,
it's weird for sure.
yeah. So we'll get to a couple audience questions before you go, if that's all right.
Sure.
So Fluff9 just asked, how deep is this draft? And I guess if you could compare it to last year's draft, which I think people said was not deep, especially at the top, but then it turned out to kind of produce a lot of good NBA players pretty quickly. So where would you rank this compared to that?
I think last draft was definitely not good at the top, so it's not deep at the top for sure. But I think it more leveled out as you got into the teens and 20s and 30s. I think that was all pretty decent talent range. This one is definitely good at the top. Then there's a sharp drop off after the top 5 or 6, and then after that, there's another drop off once you get to the end of the lottery, and then it kind of continues on from there. It's not. I don't think it's as flat as last year's draft. I think there's definitely a couple drop off points. I wouldn't. It's hard to say though, because we're getting into the point where the last couple drafts in particular, you've seen undrafted guys or guys that are picked in the 50s that are contributing for their teams, and it's kind of difficult to project depth when there's so many players who obviously should have been drafted, like Lou Dort, who end up going undrafted. And then you're like, wow, this draft is so deep. Lou Dort went undrafted, and he could be an all-star, all defensive player in a few years. So it's interesting because I think there is definitely a few drop-offs, and it's not as flat throughout, but it's still an all right draft in terms of total depth.
Okay. And then this person who I'm not gonna attempt to pronounce their name, I apologize, but how much upside do you think Trent has, and how much would you be willing to pay him? I'll just leave this to you because I've talked about Trent, I think, plenty. So yeah, what do you think?
I think the most I'd be willing to pay him would be like a 464 deal. I think once we get into the 70s, you're kind of getting into iffy territory, because I don't think he should be paid more than OG or close to OG.
Right. So that's 16 mil a year, right? Just for everyone to
yeah.
do the math.
Yeah. So close to 15, 16 is probably what I would be looking to pay him. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think his ceiling or his upside, I mean, Trent can really be like a 20, 22 point per game scorer on decent efficiency. We just haven't in Toronto. He's kind of his efficiency's kind of stayed at around 39, 40%, like we saw in Portland. So if he can improve his finishing at the rim and just his overall shot selection, shot IQ, I could see him becoming like a fringe all-star 20 point per game guy. I don't know if I will say he's going to become an all-star, but he's 22 years old, so that's kind of hard to pin on a young player like him. But 464, and I think he can definitely hit that fringe all-star 20 point per game territory.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think there's also a chance that this is who he is, right? And that there's a chance he doesn't grow that much, and that he's like more of a shooter than anything. And like you said, a player like that you don't want to pay upwards of $20 million for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's all the questions I have. Is there any last points you want to make, I guess, about this Raptor season or any young guys, anything you have in mind?
Um, yeah, I mean, you guys talked about the recent Giddy and Davion Mitchell buzz in some past episodes, I think. Um, I'd be a bit careful about those two, just because we
Mhm.
mentioned how raw Giddy is, and I personally don't think Mitchell's worth anything near a top 10 pick. So that's something for Raptors fans to keep an eye on for sure. Um, I see some comments about Mobley going on down there. There's a lot of division amongst Mobley, and I will say that regardless how you feel about Mobley, he is the second best
Right.
prospect in the draft, and his upside is realistically something like, uh, you know, uh, if he can figure out his handle and his dribbling, you're looking at a future superstar, just because he's already a good scorer and a good defender already at age 19, and he's a 7 footer. He may be a bit thin, but he can do everything at a really good level already. So Mobley is someone that I really don't think Raptors fans should be saying, "Hey, we don't need Mobley. We need a more experienced center." No, if we get Mobley, you should be thanking any kind of lottery gods, any whatever deity you believe in, because Mobley will be a really good player in this league.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I'm the same way with like centers. I generally don't want a center, but Mobley's the exception to the rule, right? Where
Yep.
anytime you have that much upside, you have to go for it and take your chances. And I mean, he's a ridiculous player. So anyone who's saying that probably hasn't watched him that much. I don't know. One more question here, and I mean, you might have answered it. Um, if we got the seventh pick and you could have anyone out of the top five, who would your starting five be next year? I don't know if you want to take this.
Oh, so outside the top five, so if we stay at seven, for
Yeah.
example, I'm picking Moody or Springer.
Yeah.
I'm probably taking Springer.
Okay.
Um, and our starting five next year is probably going to be like VanVleet, Trent, OG, Pascal, and Rashawn Holmes. That's what I would say would be ideal, given given realistic expectations. I'm not going
How
to say,
many?
oh, I'm not going to
Yeah.
say, oh yeah, let's get Giannis,
Yeah.
let's trade Malachi Flynn for Miles Turner. I'm not going to say anything like that, but yeah, those VanVleet, Trent, OG, Siakam, Holmes would be my ideal starting five.
How many years or months would it take, in your opinion, for Springer to pass Trent in the starting lineup?
Oh man, I mean that depends on how much leash we give him coming into his rookie season. Nurse doesn't really like. Who knows? We might send him down to the 905 all year.
Yeah.
But I would say Springer is someone who can become a point guard or a shooting guard. He can. So it's kind of difficult to say where we'd place him, but depending on how his playmaking and shooting comes along, he could probably surpass Trent by his second or third year if he develops the way people expect him to. But I'm not really sure where I'd like to speculate on how, because Trent could develop even better too.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's why that's such a hard question. I just thought about it, but because I don't think they want that pick at that seventh spot to be someone who like they stash or that they play in the G League all season. Like, I think they're gonna draft someone who they believe can play and contribute right next
Yep.
season. But yeah, I mean, that's it from me. Thanks so much for joining us, Brendan. I'll let you have a minute to plug whatever work maybe you have coming out on Raptors Republic or anywhere else in the coming weeks. So go ahead.
Yeah. So on Tuesday, I got a piece coming out about the top five. So Cade, Mobley, Green, Suggs, and Kaminga. And that's going to be the first part in a 3-part series. The following week, I'm going to touch on players in the 6 to 10 range that I'd like the Raptors to take a look at, including Moses Moody and Jaden Springer. And then the week after that, I'll just be talking about 5 players that I personally really like in the draft. That maybe second rounders, maybe late first guys, maybe guys that are just outside the lottery. But it'll be a 3-part series about the draft that I think Raptors fans should take a look at if they're looking to get a handle on certain players for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'll encourage our audience to keep an eye out on raptorsrepublic.com for that stuff. Follow him on Twitter. His Twitter is right there, Brandon PS97. And I just want to say, I guess, to our audience, thanks so much for sticking with us this season. It has definitely been a little not what we're used to from a Raptors point of view, a lot less winning than we're used to, but we've seen people stick with us every game, no matter win or loss. So we appreciate you, and I'm speaking for Sahal here too. And me and Sahal, we will be back. We're gonna keep doing these shows every once in a while, even though it won't be as consistent. Like I said, we'll do a draft lottery show for sure. We'll do a draft show for sure, and we might do some Canada basketball shows or other shows during this summer. So yeah, I mean, we will be around, and thanks for the season, and have a good Sunday.